Ruthless One, Part 3. He frowned as he went back into the back. That was a good speech, well given, he smiled at the group leader. He forgot his name, but Bobby smiled and shook his hand. Nice group of people you have here. I must be getting along. They shook hands. His political advisor and one of his many speechwriters were with them. They stayed for a bit, for just idle conversation, until the escort arrived. He wasn't in the mood for idle conversations anymore. He was in the mood for getting things done and making things go. That is where he was in the administration, but that just didn't hold true anymore. He just didn't want to be a deadbeat over this, and perhaps there were answers to his questions. He had to go home, though. He had to go back to the office. He had to fly back to D.C. to deal with the growing ghetto problem. He had to deal with the civil rights problem. He had to deal with the civil rights leaders. He had to deal with these memorials given to his brother's name. He had speeches to give to the commemorations for his brother John, who in his opinion was brutally killed and murdered. Ready, sir? He smiled and shook the man's hand one last time. Happy St. Patrick's Day, and thank you once again for the opportunity to speak. The man smiled. No, thank you for taking our invitation. It was an honor having you here tonight. He left with his escort through the hallways and the back door where his car was fenced off from the crowds of people. He got into his car and waved at the crowd. He was wishing for a moment that there wasn't any people to be seen. He wanted moments of silence. He wanted moments of where he was alone to mellow in his sorrow of his brother. He was mourning for his brother's death, and he had a hard time with that fact. He just didn't want to see those images again. He wanted to move on with his life. But the news anchors and the televisions just wouldn't stop showing those images. They wouldn't stop putting articles in newspapers. Good speech, sir. He looked as they drove out. It was his driver and escort. He must have been in the room or off to the side during his speech. Thanks. He pulled his jacket closer as it was still cold outside. There was still snow, but it was a nice day. On to the airport they went, he thought to himself. He just wanted freedom from all the publicity and attention, but at the same time he wanted to do more. He wanted to be in the role of helping others. He wanted to do more to help with those Negroes, or black people. He wanted to help them find their way. He thought it was disgraceful how they couldn't do the things that every other average man and woman could do. There was definitely a gap in education and rights being violated. He just wished they wouldn't riot so much and cause so much damage. They were becoming hard to control and harder to invite into the world of normal living if they riot as they do. He had to get them into work at the Justice Department. He had applied and then was appalled how not only a few worked in the department and worked hard to change that. It seemed not to be at his level of control. He had so much to do. This grieving process was taking its toll. It was cheering up a bit, but it was hard. He had his family of 9 with 1 on the way. He had Jackie and John's family to look after. They were taking John's death hard. How could this happen to their family? Could the death be related to all the bastards they went after? Could his death be related to their father's enemies? Or could this death be Robert's enemies? Bobby had union bosses on his neck for racketeering. He had civil rights activists who were against their policies. Then there were the Cubans, Russians, and third world countries where he puts his policies of assassinations into work. He had a lot of enemies, but that never stopped them from continuing on with their work. They took their chances. They took their enemies head on. They didn't think much of the fall of a king. They didn't think of the humiliation of scandals in the White House that Bobby had to cover. He didn't think of Hoover and perhaps his role. He had too much power, and now with John in charge, he frowned. He didn't want to think of Johnson. The primaries were at their heat for the Republican Party now. The rush to find a vice president candidate for the Democratic Party was near its peak. Johnson wasn't keen on picking him up, and Bobby didn't want to be his vice president either. They couldn't get along for any reason whatsoever. Their relationship was getting worse, with his brother being dead. No matter what he said, Johnson would do the direct opposite. So it was better to keep his mouth shut and say nothing. "What's the agenda when you get back?" his escort asked. "Go back to work. I have a lot of paperwork to do." That was his usual answer to people. He knew the question would come up. It always did. "How's it going, if you don't mind, with Jackie?" There went the question. No matter where he went, he always gets asked the same question concerning the assassination. She is doing much better than expected, but it is taking it hard. Any wife would when seeing their husband be murdered in front of their eyes. He said coolly, closing the conversation at that moment. His escort got quiet. After that, leaving Bobby in quiet. They got to the airport, where people were lined up again. Hopefully they wouldn't break through, but he got out and shook hands on the way. People were screaming and jumping up and down as he touched their hand. He wasn't part of the Beatles, but sometimes he felt like he was just as influential as them, as their music swayed the people into frenzies of riots. He didn't like riots. People got hurt, people got killed, property gets damaged, and he worked hard to make sure that didn't happen.